my, how lewd.
On October 25th, 1978, the horror genre of film changed forever with the introduction of Michael Myers. Although not the birth of the subgenre, John Carpenter's Halloween refined and set the standard for all slasher films to come. From the chilling presence of a killer hunting teens in the night, to jump scares and gory kills that aren't cheap or tasteless, it pushed the envelope for mainstream horror cinema despite the many other schlocky and blood-filled horror films that came before it. Need I mention Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or Wes Craven's The Hills Have Eyes? Its soundtrack is infectious, its visuals are stunning, and its acting is surprisingly competent for a horror film. Critically praised from release to this very day, it remains a classic in not only horror history, but film as a whole. And then they released the second one. And then a third, and another, and another, and a retcon film, a sequel to that film that retcon storylines for the previous one, then a reboot, a sequel to the reboot, a re-reboot that was a direct sequel to the original, and etc., etc. Needless to say, the slasher subgenre of film became prone to constant update and continuation. From the 80s onward, we'd see more and more of Jason, Freddy, Chucky, and, of course, Michael Myers. And as the slasher subgenre died down in terms of popularity, deemed by the public to be cheap in terms of character depth and overall message, there still remained a core fanbase for these films despite all their flaws, and that continued to grow over time. There was a craft to slashers, a level of cheese and cartoonish violence that is revered for its camp and unabashed joy in making mayhem. Japan has a different flavor of horror compared to the West, especially in print. Despite the beauty and terror of Junji Ito's artwork and the spiritually disturbing thrillers of Oshimi Shuzo, horror manga rarely delves into just pure slasher territory. However, there is one creator, and especially duo, who have made a name in recent years for a horror manga that excels in bringing back the vibes of slasher films in all of their gory, cheesy glory. Hokazono Masaya is a mangaka who focuses mainly in story and especially in horror, though his catalog does diverge in some areas into romance and lighthearted fare. He's been in the industry for a long time and has released a slasher manga before called Freak Island, but it's not nearly as well received as the topic of this retrospective. The artist on board for this particular work is Seima Taniguchi, a particularly newer and exceptionally detailed artist who, despite releasing one or two one-shots such as Sumu Kimono, hasn't done much of note other than this main work. Ladies and germs, Pumpkin Night. Launched in the digital press line Manga in 2016, Pumpkin Night harkens back to a simpler and grimier time for horror than the modern subtextual work of the current day. A down and dirty piece of material you'd read if you're not of the faint of heart and enjoy the offensive and downright disturbing. What I'm trying to say is that it's pure schlock. The schlockiest of schlockfests. Pure enjoyment at a darkly comedic level and manages to get you with its obsession with flying eyeballs and gushing blood. Starring a pumpkin-wearing, face-scarred, overtly psychotic schoolgirl as the big bad antagonist and later protagonist of the narrative, Pumpkin Night starts off as a little more than a revenge manga a la I Know What You Did Last Summer, with a group of asshole high schoolers being hunted down and brutally maimed by our main girl Naoko Kirino, as well as anyone who dares get in the way of her score. The worst of these is Naruto, whose corrupt nature is revealed over the course of the first major story arc, going from stereotypical cool guy to batshit fucking insane. The only one of the main group of bullies that originally caused her facial scarring that truly regrets his involvement is Naoko's crush from her school days, Kazuya Makino. Someone who, at first, doesn't seem anything like a sociopathic killer in his own right, but later becomes so enraptured again by his school sweetheart and her revenge quest, that he becomes a copycat killer in his own right. An edgy, Green Goblin-looking ass who has gone just as cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs as his lover. This isn't even the only copycat killer situation in the manga, as there are multiple end-of-volume manga that expand into their own little Pumpkin Night narrative, directly inspired by the manga and Kirino's efforts. Now, part of the enjoyment of this is very much the artwork. Seima Taniguchi's visuals are very well detailed and have a clear understanding of anatomy. Detailing kills in such an exaggerated way, it's almost charming the level of detail they put in. However, the other factor in the enjoyment of this work, specifically as an English-speaking audience, is the scanlation. The only majorly circulated translation seemingly online is done in a way that's inspired by and really encapsulates the schlock of post-peak slasher films. It's chock full of unsubtle and downright offensive humor, mixed with vocal quirks for our dear Naoko. Chillock Scanlations grips you tight and tells you, cheek and tongue, you're here to be entertained. Now, again, some of this humor is upsetting and offensive to some audiences. More than the gorish visuals, there's some choice language that might really trigger some people, and I completely understand why people would have such reservations with it. I will also say that the story, like most slasher film franchises do over time, becomes less and less strong with its continuation. It tumbles into pitfalls of resurrecting the dead in creepy authoritarian asylums, corrupt politicians and mad scientists, even directly retconning the appearance of Naoko over time to be less scary pre-face scarring compared to her original introduction. You can easily argue it was the bully's interpretation of the character, but literally the only thing wrong with Naoko we see prior to the pumpkin was that she was just annoying? Maybe? Quirky? She's really just a regular anime girl in her backstory. In another franchise, she would have been a main love interest, or at least part of a harem. I think that might be the point, though. All of this, really. So, if you're looking for a horror manga that increasingly takes itself less seriously, becoming a long-running slasher movie told with every cliche in the book and impressive visuals, Pumpkin Night is a love letter to these kinds of films, of every scary thing under the sun that's meant to make an audience cheer for the massacre. Hopefully you give this dirty little gem a good look and have a good time. Thank you for watching. Sorry.